I know. He's headed out to New Mexico.
He's driving?
We gotta,
You say he's
I
headed?
was thinking of.
They're driving.
Put it together, man, it was for.
But they,
Oh.
I know, I didn't get specific, I didn't ask him his vehicle number, but he said he'd be available.
You ready?
If we had any.
The TV will be on.
Hey, Jamie.
You good? Amy, live? All right, good evening. It's 5 p.m. This is a special joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting, Tuesday, September 26th. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. Nicole, you want to do roll call, please?
Sure. Councilmember Bogosian?
Here.
Councilmember Hahn?
Here.
Councilmember Myers? Councilmember Ward?
Here.
Councilmember Streetman?
Here.
Councilmember Popson?
Here.
Councilmember Anderson?
Here.
Councilmember Pierce?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Denton?
Here.
Mr. Rubin?
Here.
Mr. Stone?
Here.
Ms. Nagowski?
Here.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you. And I'm here too, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
All good. Citizens' comments?
Not for this meeting, no,
After
sir.
this one, thank you. So the purpose of our meeting, discussion of recommendations from the Planning Commission regarding city's short-term rental program and related policies. You'll recall in August, we had the recommendations were presented. Council wanted to have further conversations with the Planning Commission, so that's why we are here tonight. In your packet was a memo Douglas had prepared in July recapping those recommendations. Douglas, do you want to take us through those and just kind of one by one
Yeah.
have some dialogue?
Yeah, if you don't mind, if we could start with the first, I think that was kind of the most, probably the most complex and the most meaningful of the four. And the first one would have the ordinance limit the occupancy of newly constructed, substantially improved, or homes that let their license lapse, have their occupancy revert to 8, a maximum of 8. Currently, there is a minimum requirement for newly constructed homes built after 2010 that goes to 12. This would change that to 8, and it would broaden the net to being, anything newly constructed. So if you had a home that had a license in 2010, 2015, you tore it down, you built it new, or you've substantially improved it, or you let your license lapse, it would go to 8. So that one, in your kind of digesting this at your workshop, this I think was the kind of most meaningful, and I think it is. That's a fairly major change. I will say from an administrative standpoint, people kind of hear on the street that there is a maximum occupancy for newly constructed houses at 12. And we have this kind of look-back provision that looks back to what the status was in 2010 that always seems to surprise people. So there'll be a brand-new house being built, the neighborhood will see it going up, they'll call our office and they'll just say, hey, I just want to be sure that the occupancy of that house is going to be 12, correct? Because it looks like it's being built for more than that. And we will respond, we have to kind of walk through the ordinance, we'll respond that, no, we actually look back to the status at 2010, and if at 2010 that house was licensed for 22 people, the new house can have 22 people. So it's a little bit contrary to kind of the theory out on the street, but that is the way it works. This would change that, would say anything built new would go, and again, the other, it's kind of a two-part change. It's a wider net, and it reduces it from 12 to 8. So kind of a lot going on there, and I think this was the one that kind of raised questions
Can I ask
probably
a-
most.
I was going to ask just an overall question to the Planning Commission. What is it that's driving the, maybe obvious to many, but what's driving the 12 to 8? And how did you come up with the 8? Is there any magic to the number, or is it to try to reduce density? Sandy, you go for it.
When we started our deliberations back in 2022, we were looking at zones that would be capped, zone 1, 2, and 3, as I remember. And I thought that in those zones that we would pull back from the 12 to 8. And so it would not affect the condominiums, Ocean Boulevard, Palm Boulevard existing, and the numbered streets, I believe it was 42nd through 57th. So that was kind of the original thought. And then later in deliberation and discussion, it kind of went to 8 on everything. And I wasn't here for that meeting. But anyway, that's where I believe that we had started. And it was that original proposal for capping the 1, 2, and 3 zones.
Did you ever consider, like on a reconstruction, not losing the grandfathering? So in other words, if somebody had a 22, even going from a 22 to a 12 or something, or was that ever considered?
So that is in here.
That is in here?
Yes, substantially improved.
But it goes to
is-
8?
It would go to 8, correct. Yeah, so, and again, a lapse is so it's casting a much broader net where it used to only catch newly constructed houses after 2010. Now it catches every newly constructed house, every substantially improved house, so more than 50% work on the house, and every property that would allow the license to lapse. If you allow it to lapse, it goes to 8. So it's a much broader net, and it goes from 12 to 8, so twofold.
Mr. Mayor. Maybe Rusty.
Well, part of it got answered because I was going to ask about more than substantially reconstructed, that's
Yeah,
more than 50%.
That's correct.
Okay. I guess the other question I would have of the planning commission would be around the thoughts of excluding children under the age of 2. Why 2? How did we land on that?
So, yeah, if I could answer that. 2 is already in the ordinance, so that's not a change. The planning commission did deliberate about lowering the occupancy to 8, but also elevating the exclusion that's currently at 2 to some number higher than 2. The thought there being that, 6, 7, 8-year-olds that's a group that the city would want to encourage to come. That's families, that's not kind of big parties, that's families coming. But as they kind of went through that process, I think that they landed on the idea that a 7 or 8-year-old still requires a bed, and so it becomes much more kind of complex to enforce. You could then build a 20-bedroom house and just say, I'm going to have a lot of 7, 8, 6-year-olds. So I think that kind of drove back to going to the current ordinance, which excludes 2 and under, with the theory being that they're generally in a crib, not a bed, not a bedroom, they're in with mom and dad.
And the older you are, it's harder for, say, police or somebody who would be enforcing the age. You could tell a 2-year-old. You don't have to even be a parent to know a 2-year-old. But could any of us distinguish, well, maybe a good mother could, between a 6 and a 7-year-old? And they're not going to have IDs. So, that became problematic. And all these discussions that we had, that number 8 just got kind of left in there. There was not a unanimity on that number of 8, more of a discussion point. Another comment that I had made in our discussions, when the city enacted the limitation of 12 people, 12 occupants per home, that dramatically affected how we designed homes and the homes that were being built out there. So I had some responsibility in some of those big homes as an architect. And now, that's not even in anybody's, as far as I know, thoughts, because there's a new rule.
Excuse me, Ron, can I just ask clarification on that? So you're saying that basically, a 6-bedroom is probably you're not going to have 10-bedroom kind of homes because of the 12 rollback, yeah.
Correct. And the 6 was always a magical number in the real estate world, 15 years ago, because that was the 12 people plus 2, or, well, that would be 10 people plus 2, but if you have kids that don't count, they might be able to go in there. And we also discussed some trends that we kind of feel, and it's purely anecdotal, but, more of the homes on the beach that are increasing in value are increasing in their rentability, because you're not going to cash flow, a front beach house valued at $7 million in a rental market. And again, just from some of my experience, the homes that were in those locations are becoming more second homes or primary homes and less rentals. So our concern primarily, or at least mine, and I can speak for most of the commission, was more of a feel of the migration of the rentals, especially once you lose that 12-bedroom place on Palm Boulevard or Ocean Boulevard, where are they going to go? Well, they're going to go back into the avenues, as we call them. And that's why we were trying to zone and decrease that capacity. I've got a rental house next to me. Fortunately, it's a poorly designed house, so they never have too many rentals. I think it has 6 bedrooms, but they never have, 8 people there twice a year. But, if it did, that's far more of an impact than an 8-person home. And so, trying to figure out what we want to do as an island, a community, certainly you'd be setting a new tone for future homes and their sizes, which we've also addressed in other forms with impervious surface coverages and things like that. But, that's part of an impact that is possible if that number were to be adopted.
Sue,
And again,
do you
like I
have
said, there's not unanimity about that.
Do you have a comment?
No, he's
You
right.
good? Blair?
Thank you. Under number 1, the language of lapse is what I'm focusing on. And if the current referendum passes, we could have somebody that wanted to have a rental license, was blocked from getting one because of the caps. How are we going to deal with that as far as the lapse and taking away their right to rent to more than 8 people?
Well, I mean, from an administrative standpoint, if they lapse and the referendum has passed, I mean, they're going to get put on a wait, and we've met that cap. They're going to get put on a wait list. So it's going to be, I mean, they're going to be twofold. If they've allowed it to lapse, their occupancy would be reduced and they would go on a wait list.
Sure,
If we've met the
but-
cap and it's an investment.
But if they did not purposely allow it to lapse, they just got blocked out because there's a cap, are we going to apply this? Or should there be an exception is the question for people that are trying to rent their property and they can't because of the cap?
How does that
I
happen?
don't think the ordinance as it's, I think, proposed will not take away a license. If you have a license, you continue that license.
No, sir, that's not how it's written. It starts new every year, and every year, everybody gets in line to
Yeah.
get a license.
But if you have a license,
one, you
you
keep it.
can get the license until you choose it to lapse.
No, sir, that's not how it's written.
Well, I think it is.
I know it's not.
That wasn't the intent,
Yeah.
sir.
It I don't care about the intent right now, it's how it's written. And the way it's written, every year, everybody's got to get in line. And there is no grandfathering of existing licenses. There was some language in paragraph 1 of E talking about grandfathering. That no longer applies because that was only if there were over 1,600 licenses as of April 30th of 2023. At that point, there were not 1,600 6% licenses. So that paragraph goes away completely. So it starts over every year as written. So we need to at least pay attention to this and whether or not we're going to, because somebody can't get a license that wants a license, are we then going to take that rental unit and make it an 8-person rental unit?
And I guess, Douglas, to that question and kind of broader, these are recommendations at this point that I guess council would eventually wrap in, depending on what happens at the election, would either wrap into this ordinance, make changes to disregard whatever we wind up doing with these specific recommendations.
Yes, these will get put into ordinance format, go through the standard first reading, second reading. They'll go back to the planning commission in ordinance form for a recommendation. So before we did that, we wanted you all to have an opportunity to see and kind of, if there were some that obviously didn't stand or
Yeah.
you didn't want to embrace, to let us know that before we.
And I was just hoping out of
This
this,
could not
this
happen
meeting.
Before the referendum.
Yeah, I was just hoping out of this meeting, we
So-
would get their
so we would
understanding
have
of how you
to
came up with these things.
adjust.
Hang on, guys.
So
Yeah.
we would have to adjust these recommendations into the new ordinance if in fact that passed.
Correct.
I think what we need is a legal interpretation of the ordinance if it passes, to make sure that we understand
That's a
what our
given.
intention is and
Yeah,
whether
that's a
that.
given. We're focused on this tonight.
Yeah.
I mean, Blair raises
agree.
an issue that we need to keep our eye on, without a doubt, but.
My understanding is that anyone who has a
I get
license
it,
can
but
keep a
that's for a
license.
later conversation.
Not correct.
This one causes me agita, I'll be quite honest with you. 12 to me is a reasonable number. To keep ratcheting down the numbers and the bedrooms and the lot sizes and things that we have on the island, this one causes me agita, that's all I'll say.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
No, can I
Go
ask
ahead. Yeah,
first?
go ahead.
Refresh my memory, do we have a limit in the number of bedrooms that a home can have these days?
No, there's not. There's, there's various aspects of the zoning code that get to it. There's a maximum size that kind of
Square
drives the,
footage. Yeah.
square footage. There is the maximum that that the soil could, if it was on a septic system. So there's a maximum occupancy if it's going to be a short-term rental. So I would say that there are indirect drivers on it, but there
Yeah.
is no cap on the number of bedrooms. And that was an intentional, people said, well, under that kind of paradigm, somebody could build a 10-bedroom house, but we're telling them they could only rent it to 12, and the community was okay with that. They said, if you choose to do that because you have a big family and you want a 10-bedroom house, but you're only going to rent it to 12, the code allows that.
Okay. Because my concern is too that I've had friends from North Carolina that come down for a family reunion, and if they're more than 12, they'd rent 2 houses. But it seems to be 10 or 12 with my family and the others that I know, that with those kind of groups, I think we want to encourage. And 8 is more of a nuclear family, in my opinion, whereas 12 is really when you're getting into extended family. So,
Before,
That's,
Good, Ron, go ahead.
before you leave the notion of bedrooms and limitations, to Douglas's point, septic tanks have often been a limiter of bedroom space. And Folly Beach in particular has very bad soils, worse than ours, where even an engineered septic system might accommodate 2 bedrooms. And their DHEC judges it by bedrooms, not bathrooms. So, of course, being the crafty architect that I am, we've done homes on Folly Beach with 4 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 6 studies. So, because a bedroom purely is defined by often having a closet in it in most jurisdictional limitations. So, it doesn't mean you can't later put an armoire in your study or your library if you want to give them different names. But you have to be really careful in how you do that. And I'm saying that just because I'm one of those kind of guys. If you're going to, if you're going to make a law, let's test drive it. And, we could drive a semi through that. So there have to be other tools.
Scott?
Yeah, I just want to rewind. I think what I heard was the 8 was sort of the genesis when the zones were being considered, and you were using it almost as a deterrent to keep the larger occupancy from penetrating the neighborhoods. Is that kind of what I heard? And I'm kind of, I think with Philip, I'm kind of there too. I think going from reeling everything back from 12 to 8 is probably not going to be a real acceptable or popular move. But how about maybe looking at that, applying the 12 to either a new construction or to a long lapse period of time? Maybe that's a consideration to try to, much softer, but that gets us to more of an island-wide 12 approach at some point.
Because Douglas, what's the number of grandfathered, 40 or something? Do you remember?
Yeah, I don't know the number.
Okay.
I think it's 100, I think it's 100, at least on the advertised, there's 146 properties.
More
that
than
were-
12?
That are over 12, and they have total occupancy of 2,405. That was the number I had at the time. So it was, yeah.
So is that a general kind of head nod that closing, that, again, it's twofold. I think I'm hearing that you will kind of like the first aspect of that, that's rolling back occupancy for newly constructed or substantially improved or lapsed, but you're not feeling great about the reduction from 12 to 8? Is that kind of general, that's kind of what I think I'm hearing, is that? seem to be okay?
So with what you just said, that starts getting into the 100-plus
Yes.
grandfathered.
It would start
if
to
they
kind of
redo or tear down or whatever.
redo that 140 or so that, and start to bring them close, down to 12.
Gotcha.
If
But
they're-
only if they tore it down and were
Only
to
if
build,
they tore it
yeah.
down. and lapsed.
Substantially,
So if they
yeah.
keep it
And it
as
would
a,
have to be over 50%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as
That
long
was-
as long as they had it, maintained it, continued to keep it in the rental program, it would be allowed to continue at
At
whatever
the
occupancy
grandfather
it has.
number. Let me get Sandy before we answer your question.
Councilman Pierce is right on with what his deduction was in terms of the 8 to 12. Originally, as I said, it was to stop the migration into the interior of the island, in the neighborhoods. I wasn't here for the June meeting when this was pushed forward, or I would have commented on, I believe that it really should be 12, as you're talking about. The original discussion, as I remember, we were talking about those properties that were grandfathered and those going to 12, the ones that were over 12. And we deliberated on that quite a while and left, we never did finalize that, and then this came back and we somehow ended up at 8. But also, in our several meetings now, we've had the police chief in to talk about some of these issues. And if I'm misreading what I heard, it's not a real problem that 8's going to fix anything versus 12 as we have in our standing ordinance. I just felt that we needed to deal with some of what Douglas was talking about, the surprise in the marketplace when people go, what do you mean that house can have 15, 20, or 22, I think is the largest property, and they're grandfathered forever even if they tear it down. And so that was something I felt strongly needed to be addressed in the community. Those limits needed, there needed to be a trigger that number came down.
So just to summarize, Sandy, what you're saying in Douglas's terms, you're a proponent for broadening the net, but not the number. In other words, you catch more that fall into the limitation, but not the actual number, keep it at 12.
Well, some trigger needs to lower a 22
Right.
occupancy home down to 12
Yeah.
as
Well,
well.
that
Which
would
is
be
broadening the net, I think.
Substantially
Yeah.
Yes.
remodeled,
I think that's
reconstructed.
reasonable.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, do you have a comment? Were you trying to hop in? Sorry.
I just was going to ask Douglas, hopefully you can hear me.
Yep.
Help me understand, how do we enforce these numbers, whether it's 22 or 12 or 8, or how do we enforce these?
Yep, so I would say kind of 90% of the enforcement is the marketing and.
Do you mind repeating that question before?
Yes, okay. For those that couldn't hear Kevin, question was, how do we enforce it? If this occupancy number, if it's 12 or it's 15, how does the city become aware of it? How would we enforce that? And primarily, the way we enforce that is through the marketing. We have historically kind of spot check people when we get a call. A neighbor calls and says, hey, this thing has got a lot of people. We look into it and see how they're marketing it. Here more recently, with Rentalscape is able to also do that. They're comparing our list of permitted occupancy versus the advertised occupancy. That's, again, probably 90% of it is we're getting the advertised occupancy correct. In terms of real, kind of real-time enforcement, it would always be in reaction to something else going on. A police would show up for a call, they see something that's out of line. So primarily, it's marketing, but it can be in reaction to a call about an overcrowded house.
But is the bottom line, I guess I'll ask the chief this, you don't have to get up to the podium now. If you don't have probable cause, you can't enter into a dwelling to verify what the count is. Is that pretty much the truth on the ordinance there? Yes, sir.
That was a head nod and a yes, sir,
Yeah.
from chief.
That's where the noise ordinance or the parking, number of cars parked on the lot might be, what's the trigger for it? Yeah.
Correct. Kevin, did you get that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So I think to your question, Douglas, yes.
Okay, good.
I think we're keeping the number at 12, broadening the net, John, to your comment, to where things are reconstructed, torn down, trying to work on the grandfathered ones to get them down to 12 over time. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yep, we ready to move on to the next one?
There's
The re-
one, 30 minutes, there's one.
The rest are easy. So number 2.
Oh, now you blew it.
Number 2, require a minimum of 2-night stays excluding hotels. This is aimed at trying to reduce the one-night party. They show up for one night, they're gonna kind of blow it out. They rent, short notice, show up, have a party. I would say that from my perspective, there wasn't an enormous amount of evidence that this is popular, happening a lot. I think the chief was aware of one event that was a one-night thing, and I think they were only there for one night, and it did cause problems, but I would say it probably wasn't widespread. The other part of this is, as you'll see, the exclusion, as it's in the memo, is just to hotels. The planning commission did talk about smaller, other units that are just smaller. You know, those would tend to be the ones that would be a one-night stay, potentially excluding those like for instance, a sea cabin. The way this memo is written, a sea cabin wouldn't be bound to a multiple night minimum, but it might be something the city wants to consider also exempting other small units as well. So we could work that out in the drafting if you all were of a mind to do that. But the way it's written now is any short-term rental, except for hotels, would have to have more than, would have to have at least 2 nights.
I mean, Sandy, talk to your experience.
Being in the property management business, most of the managers don't want one night. There's no return on the investment to the owner. We don't want to hear from the owner because we rented it for one night. They got 0, electric, water, cleaning, linens, all the amenities to set a unit up is about equal to the rent. So it's not a big issue. I do know, though, having said that, Wild Dunes does do some work in the Port of Call, the one-bedroom condominiums down there, some of the one-bedroom Mariners Walk units. So there is some utility on one nights in those. But if it's the residential community, couldn't it just be that the SR1s are limited to 2-night minimums? And would that not now exclude condominiums in general, allowing for the Wild Dunes properties?
Well, if you-
And those properties in the
Would not cover all of them.
Right.
commercial area?
That would not cover anything in Wild Dunes if you made it
SR1.
SR1.
Yeah. But again, we've got one occurrence that it sounds like anybody's thinking we can even remember where there was a one-night
Yeah.
problem property. I mean, it just feels like we're taking a sledgehammer to it.
2 things. One is, are condo hotels covered under the umbrella of hotels, or do we need to spell that out?
So there is
Hotels
not
and condo
technically, you know,
hotels.
there's not a classification of condo-tel. That's
Right.
kind of a unique thing to us.
That's what I thought.
And again, I think that's in the details, and we did hear from Wild Dunes specifically that they have condo units that are, I think, used almost identically to a hotel room.
Right.
From a strict reading of the memo, and it's not even an ordinance yet, that would say that if they were to rent that condo unit, it would have to have at least 2 nights, but if they rented a true hotel room, that would not be limited to the 2 nights. So that would be something, if you're of a mind to embrace this recommendation, that we could flesh that out. That one will be a little tricky because a condo, unless I think the point would be either all condos are excluded from this provision. I don't think there's a way to only exclude condo rooms that are managed in connection with a hotel.
And my next question is, are we trying to overregulate? If it's large parties, then we're going to catch them with another part of another ordinance, like noise or parking or something like that, if we're trying to discourage that. What Sandy has said, that it doesn't make any financial sense to rent out for a day unless you are a hotel. So do we need this regulation, I guess? Is it a problem?
I think you're hearing no, but what others? Rusty?
Yeah, thank you. I think, Douglas, what you touched on too, the communication from Wild Dunes also was in regard to some of the, I guess, condo tales or whatever that they have out in, what is it, Sweetgrass, in that area there. And
The
when they
villages,
book-
yeah.
The villages.
Yeah, and when they have group contracts, many times they have speakers and people like that that come in and they present for one night, they stay one night and they're gone.
Right.
To me, that makes sense that they would be a part of this group that would be excluded. The other thing is, this is really, I guess, a question for the chief more than anything. It really touches on what the mayor said earlier, but how big of a problem do we really have on this island with one-night blowout parties? I mean, I've been here a long time, and I can count on one hand what I've seen and witnessed and heard about. Now, I know that we've probably had more, but again, I think we are trying to overregulate here to some extent when we start talking about a minimum of 2-night stay and the fear that there's going to be a lot of one-night parties going on in some of these homes.
Councilman Streetman?
Yes.
Can I interject something? I wanted to
Yeah.
expand upon what Sandy was saying. So, you know, Councilman Anderson may say, yes, we're overregulating, but another thing we took into consideration was when you do those one-night turnovers, the amount of vendor traffic and maintenance on these places, especially in condos where you have very little parking, and now you're bringing in housekeeping and maintenance, only to turn that place over and start all over again the next day. So, I mean, that was another perspective, I think, that gets lost.
No, I get that. I get that, you know, that maintenance and upkeep and that sort of
Now, like
thing,
the
the turnover.
hotel is perfect because
Right.
everything is kind of self-enclosed.
But I think we also need to be sensitive to, I mean, if you've got a business, basically, that they've got group contracts, and they line these things up, and, you know, if you do anything that tinkers in a very negative way with that, eventually you're going to have people that say, I'm not writing a contract out there. It's not favorable for us. It's not good for us to go out there because we can't go there, do our presentation, stay one night and get out of there. That's all I'm saying, is that if we're not careful here, we'll just tend to overregulate this and tamp it down to the point that we actually hurt the revenues on the island long-term.
Well, if you're talking about Sweetgrass or the Village, that's even worse because there is nowhere to park unless you go under there.
But those folks are already on site typically
Yeah.
for cleaning.
They are on site, but then if you've seen the back, you know, HVAC people, they're all along the road through Grand Pavilion. And, you know, there's a dumpster that sits out there. I swear it must be full-time because, you know, people just cleaning things out. But if you go along the backside, there's a lot of congestion. But I'm not saying we should or shouldn't. That was just one
Just a
of
point.
the thought process.
Yeah.
But also,
Ron, go ahead. Then
well,
Blair.
I also want to just add, it's a behavior check as well. I've lived next door to a rental house now for 20 years. And again, it doesn't have a very good rental record, but when people are there for the week, yeah, they blow it out. They've checked in Saturday night, and so they'll test the speakers. They'll test the metal, they'll swim in the pool. By the time the end of the week, or the week progresses, the noise has petered down. With a 2-night stay, we've had a lot of bachelorette parties and some wedding parties next door, and they're only there for 2 days, and that is a little bit more of a ruckus crowd. Now, 15 years ago, yeah, we had the livability number on speed dial, and my wife helped contribute to make 42nd and 43rd Avenue the most called upon block in town. We've gotten older and more mellow, and it doesn't bother me as much. We're doing our own thing. I brought a TV out on the porch to combat it. So I'm probably a problem. But, you know, the notion being, you know, the attitude of the renter for a 2-night stay is going to be vastly different from a 6 or 7-night stay group that's there for the long haul, essentially. And so I think that was why it also got a little bit of some levity in our conversation.
I get that also, but still, I mean, and to me, I mean, there you have the property manager has skin in the game on that and making sure that there's bachelorette parties or bachelor parties or whatever else, that they're on top of those type of issues. And I think I watched your planning commission meeting. I think I heard the chief say that they have really good cooperation from the property managers. When there's any issue, that they can go to them, whether it's a livability officer or uniform officer or the chief or anyone else, and they get rapid response from the property managers when there's a problem. And that's where I'm coming from, is that, if we don't have a real serious problem out there, right now, then let's put it back on the property managers to be responsible for making sure they educate people and warning people that if you're just out here to party and you're going to raise a ruckus, you're going to pay for it, and, sorry I interrupted. Go ahead.
Blair?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think when we start talking about hotels versus condotels versus condos, we're slicing the tomato a little bit too thin here on these issues. If the driving force, as I understand it, is large beach houses having flash parties or one-night parties, there was one down at about 38th and Palm last year that just showed up, and we got it shut down. But if that's the issue, let's fix the issue. And so SR1 only makes a whole lot of sense to me. Instead of coming with a big hammer, do it a little bit at a time. Maybe we do SR1 now and see what it looks like. Or maybe we do what Rusty just suggested. We push it off onto livability and see if they can get control. If not, then we do SR1. And if that doesn't work, then we move on down. But let's not go with a huge hammer when we don't have that large of a nail.
John?
Well, I don't think the nail is the one-night parties. I think the nail is more what Ron was talking about, when you're having 3-day parties or 2-day parties with bachelorette parties and those things. And to Councilman Streetman's point, I don't think Ron should be the enforcement arm of the short-term rentals, having to call the police and setting records, and then the police, and then come back and say, oh, we better get the property managers involved, and then the property man, that doesn't work, right? So we're trying to set ordinances that control and present a livability kind of characteristic of the island that we all want. And to me, I'm against it for the opposite reason. I don't think 2 days is enough. I think that's still a short-term party. Whether you're 1 day or you're 2 days, it still invites, bachelorette parties coming in on a Friday, Saturday night to party. So I don't think if we've got the stomach or the willingness to go to at least 3 nights, I think it's a worthless kind of an effort. But to me, what we're trying to solve for are the relatively short-term rentals that create the ruckus on the island. And those are more bachelor parties, bachelorette parties, excuse me, fraternity parties and those type of things. And it would take a longer, requirement here than 2 days.
Was there a discussion of having it longer, like a 3-day or 4-day minimum? Because I know most places that I've ever rented a
Yes.
VRBO or anything, there's a minimum that's much more than 1 night.
We discussed having it much longer, and then it got whittled down to 2. And the more I listen to it, the more I think, let the market drive the problem, the issue. If it's so costly that you can't turn these things over and make any money after a night or 2, then let the property managers deal with that.
Yeah, but if somebody's sitting there with an empty, a unit, that makes sense a year or 6 months out. But when somebody's sitting there a couple weeks out and the property's not rented, they're like, oh, well, shoot, we might as well get a couple bucks for a couple nights. That's.
But saying to
and
your
that depends-
point, it just
Human
doesn't
nature.
pay. 1 night's rent's not gonna cover everything I'm paying to turn that in 1 night, typically, is what you're saying. Yeah.
With
And
that,
that's
Sandy,
good.
doesn't most of them have a cleaning fee associated with it? So the cleaning fees are covered, so any of the rent you'd still get, especially on a 2-night stay?
Yes. Our homes, if you will, my company, predominantly is a 3-night minimum on homes. The condominiums, depending depending upon the owner permission, will go as little as 2 nights. And yes, we do charge guests a cleaning fee on those smaller, shorter reservations. So it's again, to Jeff's point, it's a market situation. What will the market bear in terms of that rental rate plus a cleaning fee? So you've just increased the rent,
Right.
basically, as far as the guests are concerned. And it's not inexpensive. Typically, you're not getting a lot of parties, and I think if you talk to the chief, you'll find that we don't have an overabundance of parties, given the volume that we deal with every year out here in terms of the number of reservations.
And Sean, what was your thinking on asking that? If there's already a cleaning fee,
Well, it's just the economics of it. I mean, the owner of that home is getting the rent fee. It's
Yeah.
1 night or 2 nights or whatever it is, and the cost of the cleaning and the turnover, the residents are paying, and it goes to the cleaning and the management company. So it's not like they're having to take out the cleaning fees and all those fees out of the amount they're getting for that rent. That's in addition to the rent.
yeah. Jimmy?
Are rentals down this year from previous years?
From an all-time high in 2022, 2023 is going to probably come in lower, correct?
How much? Percentage-wise?
15%, round number.
15%? I think the market should decide and not us. You know better about your business than I do.
Scott or Douglas, who was somebody trying to hop in? Sorry. Okay.
I had a question, but I can, go ahead. That's fine. Mike, yeah, well, the only
Are you wanting to
question,
move on to the next one, or are you?
No, let
Ask
Scott
I just
go.
had one
Okay.
quick question, but then let's move on. And that is, did you guys benchmark against any of the other communities around here, like Foley and Kiowa and all that?
Well, they're all different.
Yeah, that's
For the
what I thought.
minimum night?
And you're
No.
not on the commission anymore.
What'd you find out? They're all over the place?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought. Thanks.
So Douglas, I think I'm hearing not an appetite for this one.
Leave that one off? I heard,
No, I'm not.
Higher.
Yeah, higher to nothing.
So the third one?
number
Well,
3?
you know, when we discussed this, it was right after that party on
Yeah.
Palm Boulevard, so we were
It's
all
fresh.
sitting there with, some nasty thoughts in our head.
Fresh wound.
And that's why we started high. I mean, I think it was 4 or 5 day minimums, and then Sandy brought sanity back to the group. It's a tough decision to make, but 2 days versus no days, or 3 days versus no days, that's kind of where you're at. And I think it is a market-dependent issue. And if there's not any problems, like the chief told us a couple of months ago, I'm not sure what we're stamping on right now.
Number 3.
Number 3. This is Desiree's amendment. She's always wanted to have us require advertisements to include the rental license number. We've kind of gone around and around about the usefulness of that. Now we have Rentalscape that has told us that it would be very useful. Desiree cheered and kind of hung that over my head. But this is, I would say this is an amendment that makes the software work easier and more accurately to identify, to put the photographs. Right now, they're trying to link photographs and kind of a blob on a map with a property address. This requirement will make their job much easier. They'll be able to link it much easier, much more accurately. And if they don't have it, it'll obviously ping them that it's not a licensed rental.
Doing this.
So this is very much an admin thing that we think will help us
Would you say,
more
John?
accurately identify
I thought we were doing this already. I thought we talked about this before. It really didn't require council decision. It's more of a staff decision on how you manage the rentals.
Do it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So no problems
done.
there.
No.
Yeah,
I
well,
told you
Sandy,
this is going to get incrementally easier.
Sandy, you have a comment?
Years ago, we talked about it, and when we were refining some of the other ordinances that we brought forward, for restrictions and such with vacation rentals. Software companies didn't have a field that we could enter a number into. Now, as the country has changed, a lot of other communities now require a license number or some sort of a identifier to be in those software programs, and it's not difficult at all to do. And it'll make Douglas's and the staff's position. He solicited information from the software provider for the city, and they said, oh yeah, that'd help a lot. So it's just another data field we would all enter as we enter our listings.
Yeah.
Rusty.
Yeah, thank you. This one feels good to me, and I'm kind of like Councilmember Bogosian. This is like sort of deja vu all over again on this particular one. I think we did discuss it at some point. Council,
We
at
did
some level.
discuss it when we presented this
Discussed all
memo
of it.
in August. Only the number 1, 2, and 4
Okay.
were meant to get feedback from the commission
Okay.
at this
Yeah.
meeting. We are pursuing moving forward with amendments to the code that would allow us to make this as part of a requirement. So I
Okay,
think we can
thanks.
go to number 4.
Appreciate it.
And so
Douglas.
similarly, 4, I think you all may have already said that you didn't want to embrace, so I don't know if we need to rehash that, but this is the one that was, that would allow residents to rent out a room in their house, one bedroom in their house. It's what the city of Charleston's doing. You all have had discussions about it. I think it didn't feel right to you all, so it's in the memo, but I think you all have already kind of said that you wanted us to leave that out of
Yeah.
So
the future
can't-
ordinance.
I can't charge my adult children now.
You can.
I plan on doing that myself.
Scott.
Yeah, I just wanted to get, what was your logic behind recommending it?
All right,
Or
Marty.
are you
This is
all, are you
Marty's-
still on board with
this is
this,
Marty's amendment.
or is this a move on and don't worry about it?
All right, yeah, I can go with this one. So for 1 through 3 that we've been discussing, I didn't feel too passionate about any of those and didn't think they would amount to a hill of beans, so it's pretty much that now. But this one I did. I'm not going to live or die by it. It's not that important to me. I'm going to get my pennies in a bunch, but I think it's a cool idea. A lot of municipalities do it this way. And my question is, what's the harm? What are the concerns of these unintended consequences? What's the risk here?
Well, if traffic is our issue, this exponentially increases it potentially in my view, but Jan?
Could we have people renting their houses out by the hour? And all that
No to
implies?
No to that. And I don't think anything's going to increase exponentially. I mean, I don't think you're not going to see 90% of the island that wants to do this. It just gives some flexibility to.
And the way that the
small
city of
percentage.
Charleston's code is, it's very narrow for just a very small sliver of the city, I think between Cannon and Spring Streets, and it's for their, controlling their Airbnb and VRBO kind of rentals, trying to really limit the use of those. So I don't think that would apply at all to what our intentions are here.
But why not? I mean, I guess that's so to oversimplify it, I'm just trying to keep this place quasi-cool, you know?
Oh.
I'm up here with the long hair and the wild idea, I guess, but I really don't see the threat here. And again, I'm not going to pursue this to the nth degree, but just not.
Yeah, the logic for the city of Charleston is the resident is in the house, they're controlling any issues that come out of it, and they require it. There is a different district that you're speaking of that is a specific district where they allow kind of full house rentals, but outside of that district, this is the only way they allow a rental. And again, it's with that mindset of, we'll allow you to have a person, but we know that you'll be on site, you'll keep any issues to a minimum. And I think Marty's point is, when he brought it up, was that it allows, it is kind of a resident-friendly amendment that would allow residents to more flexibly use their properties. But I think he saw it as a resident-friendly amendment that didn't do any harm and was, not going to add any issues. I think and I don't want to trample on it for Marty's sake, but the ordinances and the zoning have always kind of been written on the Isle of Palms with they're not friendly to adding density. I mean, we don't allow ADUs, we don't allow, we've never allowed kind of single room rental. I think that's intentional. So it does kind of cut, in my mind, it kind of cuts against the historic kind of fabric of the zoning code in allowing some additional flexibility, but if the group were to embrace that, obviously, we could make that happen. But those are the kind of the pros and cons that I would see to it.
Blair.
But,
Sorry.
Go ahead, Blair.
Sorry, Douglas.
Thank you. Marty, I like cool. I'm not, you know, I don't understand why it's even needed, because you can already rent as a 4% resident 72 nights a year anyway.
But not a room.
Your
Not
entire.
just a room.
Well, your entire house, well, how do you differentiate between a room or an entire house?
We also do that with software. You cannot advertise or rent just a room. If you wanted to leave and rent your entire house, you can do that.
You
But
just
you
got
can't-
shut down.
I did. I didn't know that. That seems odd to me, but never mind.
You're now Team Marty, I think. Look at this.
So I think it just grants a little more flexibility to those very people, the 4%ers. And I really just don't see the downside and these impacts that have been brought up. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not valid. I mean, to Douglas's point, so we're going against the grain of what we typically do, but this is a common thing. It is fun. It's cool. Typically, you're going to get a single or a couple that come in and they're respectful, quiet. Everything's managed on site. What's the harm? That's all.
Like a bed and breakfast.
Like a bed and breakfast. Yeah, there you go.
I mean, I can see I can see your point, especially if it is 4%, if it's within the 72, limit for 4% owners. I mean, I don't really see a huge downside to it either. I don't really see it being something that's, people are gonna get really fired up about it, but I also don't see a lot of negative to it compared to the others.
So we get a complete reversal on this? Is everybody?
No, absolutely not.
We'll probably split.
Well, no, I
Well, I mean,
agree, I
don't think
agree with
Philip
Marty.
needs to make a decision unilaterally that we're absolutely not.
I'm just speaking for me, Katie.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm glad to hear that, because I listened to his case and convinced me. I don't think anything's naturally wrong about it.
So we want to leave it in the ordinance draft? I know the mayor doesn't, but I think I'm hearing.
Sounds like there's enough people to.
How did this end, Phil? I think you're.
I'm against it.
Did Scott
Kevin, you
say-
got, Kevin, comment, question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question for Douglas. What's the process? Would
What's
this
the process?
homeowner have to get a
Business
short-term
license.
rental license to rent out their bedroom?
Yes, they would. Yep.
So here we're talking about capping short-term rentals, but now we're adding some. And I get 6% versus 4%, but isn't that more work for the city, for your staff?
No, we'd be okay from a work
Just a
perspective.
license, yeah.
And they would be, I mean, if the cap were to go in effect, these would only be happening in exempted properties, so the cap would not
So, yeah.
impact this.
So we'd be increasing the number of short-term rentals by,
Possibly.
yeah.
And I guess, I'm trying to go through the logic here. So the logic is you can rent your house out as 4% or without any cap under any of the circumstances that we're considering. And the difference is you're either there or you're not. That's really all we're
Right.
talking about. And the presumption is that if you're there, you're going to have a lot more control over your tenant, and probably a calmer tenant than potentially if you're not there. So I guess Marty probably does make a pretty good case.
You're a convert. All right. I'm going to leave, I think we'll leave it
And it's
in
actually
and let you.
less, and if you're there, you're renting it to fewer people, it's just one less room. I mean, it really does.
I mean, I'd like to
Yeah,
add.
I mean, to me, it just goes
Debbie.
totally against the grain of what we're trying to do with everything else. Reduce
I don't-
congestion, reduce traffic,
And I
reduce
don't know if
trash,
I don't know if I'm
reduce
for it or
sewer,
against it yet, Philip.
Yeah.
I'm just I think Marty makes a case. And I just want to.
Don't disagree with
I think we
that,
want to
but
maybe
I just
think about
disagree
it.
with it.
But,
It doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah, no, I'm not totally convinced either.
So we'll leave it in for now.
All right.
Is that it? Thank you. There being no further business.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Off record at 5:54. Thank you, Planning Commission.